with Paul Duberstein these days.
Have you? Nancy just got a little letter to the editor published in the New York Times.
Yeah, well, he sent me that. Yeah, that's a great letter.
Isn't it?
Yeah, and
Can't read it yet.
we've been arguing about not so much as discussing the coronavirus and all that.
Yeah, I'm sure things at his school are just as wild and crazy as they are in any other community.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So does he have to go into New Brunswick? I mean, to what's the name of the school?
Rutgers.
Rutgers. Does he have to go in every?
I don't know.
I think he's working from home a lot.
That makes sense.
Isn't that amazing? We can do this in this time and age. It's unbelievable. It's like we were all waiting for the coronavirus to occur to push us into this mode of operation, because it's not going to be changing, I think, for over a year.
That's for sure.
So Bev, did Nancy's letter ring true for you?
Very much. Very much.
What was it about?
So Nancy's a psychotherapist.
Yeah.
And I didn't read the letter that she was writing in response to, but she was commenting on the blessing of being able to do this, and also the challenges of, we're still keeping our practices going via telemedicine.
Okay, so let's do, actually, someone just mentioned we should probably mute everybody for now, which I will do. Thank you for that. I'll mute you. You can, of course, unmute yourself if you have a question, and you are encouraged to do so. So, and another thing I'm going to do is spotlight my video, only because that way it will come nicely in the recording. All right, so chapter 3 in Tanya. We're going to do a very quick review on chapter 1 and 2. If you recall, chapter 1, it starts off with the word Tanya, which means it was taught in a famous Talmudic passage that the soul, before the soul comes into the baby, before it's given life to this new child, before the baby is born, the soul is administered an oath up in heaven, and it is told, Tehi tzaddik, you soul shall be a tzaddik, shall be righteous, and the al tehi rasha, and you shall not be a rasha, quote unquote, wicked. And the Tanya in chapter 1 says we have to understand what that means, these terms mean. This is our life's mission. We have to understand, what is it that we're supposed to be? A righteous, a tzaddik. What does it mean that we shouldn't be a rasha, wicked? Because when you look close to those terms, it's not as easy as being a nice guy or a bad guy. A tzaddik is someone who never sins. A wicked person even sins a little bit. And we have to understand what those mean and see how they are, this oath of being a tzaddik is attainable. We also have to understand, what does the third term mean, the Beinoni, the intermediate man, which is also brought in Talmudic categorization of people. The tzaddik, the rasha, and the Beinoni. So after saying that, it launches into the very important thesis taken from the scripture, the Alter Rebbe, which, if I haven't clarified for those that aren't so familiar, the person who wrote the book was, as you see here, Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi. I guess you have to do a mirror image to get this. Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi was the first Hasidic master of the Chabad dynasty. And he was also, but he's more like affectionately called the Alter Rebbe. Alter is Yiddish for the old, Rabbi, because he was the oldest of the whole dynasty. So the Alter Rebbe, or Rabbi Shner Zalman, interchangeable, he says, you actually have two souls. And remember, he's writing this to people who are seekers of why I want to do good, and yet I have temptation or I have struggle. You're not crazy. You have two souls. The first soul, he says, is the animal soul. And I'm not going to get into that too much, but put it like this. Your animal soul is not bad. It is only about one thing, self and self-perpetuation, just like an animal. An animal just wants to perpetuate self. It could be more primitive, but that's essentially what an animal is all about. A human being has that drive for self-perpetuation, which keeps us alive and safe and, careful as we navigate the world and other people. Of course, with that drive can come bad things like anger, ego, egotistical behavior, even right out, over using force against others in an extreme way. But of course, it's not necessarily, because you could do acts of kindness because it feels good. It feels like the right thing to do. It also comes from a sense of feeling good about yourself. So the animal soul is not immoral, it is amoral. And good traits and bad traits both can come from it. Then we went last week into chapter 2. And chapter 2 mentioned how we have a second soul. I mentioned it. It was all, but the theme was we have a second soul, which is the godly soul or the divine soul. Now, the divine soul is the exact opposite of of the animal soul. It is a spark of God, literally. It knows it. It actually feels this is my real identity, is like a glimmer of a higher reality, a source of life, God. And I actually, this soul says, I actually prefer to be incorporated into my source rather than being, far, far away, animating a body, albeit for good purpose, to make this world a better place. But it's nature. This drive, this godly drive, is I don't belong here in a self-autonomous type of way where I need to take care of myself and be and manage my body and my life. I'd rather the drive is I actually belong up there, or I belong in one way of putting it. It's like a self-annihilation, but not in like a destructive way, in a way of coming from the Latin word of ex nihilo, where God created the world something from nothing. So the godly divine soul says, I actually don't want to be a something from nothing. I actually want to get into the nothing, which is God. When we say God's nothing, we mean it's the great unknown, the great wonder beyond us. I want to the godly soul, it's not actually unknown. It's like, this is clarity. That's where I belong, in the source. So that's the summary of chapters 1 and 2. Animal soul and godly soul are the two drives, and they are diametrically opposed. One wants to perpetuate self, and one wants to be totally selfless. And we got into a little other discussion, but that was sort of a digression. Tanya said, once you understand that, we can talk about other stuff. So once we know that, okay, that's why you have these moments of wanting to do the right thing at all costs, and then at other times you're selfish. Okay, that explains. So I'm not crazy. We got to navigate, overcome the brute animal, let the selflessness guide us a little bit more. What else do we need to know? So it reminds me of a joke of from the great rabbi and Kabbalist Jackie Mason. It says, a Jewish couple is traveling on a road when suddenly the car breaks down. So the husband gets out, surmises the car, and gets back into the car and tells his wife, I think I know what the problem is. It's something under the hood. It's something under the hood, meaning that doesn't help us very much in troubleshooting. Yeah, it's somewhere, it's there. So when you know that you have a godly soul drive, an animal soul drive, but you can't really fix it, you can't navigate your real life with that general knowledge. So the next chapters, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 of Tanya is really like the anatomy. It's like the anatomy of the soul, where it breaks down based on Kabbalistic teachings, and even some, I guess, psychology, what the soul really is about. So let's get started with chapter 3. Chapter 3 says like this, that each soul, and by the way, it's going to start describing the anatomy of the godly soul in 3, 4, and 5. And then in chapter 6, it'll pretty much tell you in one chapter the anatomy of the animal soul. And the reason it can do it so quickly in chapter 6 is because we're being more deliberate in 3 chapters now. When you get to the animal soul, it's pretty much the mirror image, but it's the same sort of biology, spiritual biology. So it says like this. There's a very famous idea in Kabbalah that is called the 10 Sefirot. Is anybody familiar with that? You can type in the chat box or you can unmute yourself. If anyone wants to share what they know about the 10 Sefirot, I can add upon that. But if not, that's good too. I came prepared. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So here you go. It's a little. This chart has a lot in it. So I'd like you to focus. I think I can write on my. Oh, I can annotate. I can actually use a pencil. So Sephira. Sephirot are the 10 basic components of reality. And they are the 10 divine creative forces, the infinite, one undivided God utilizes to create everything in the universe. So there's many definitions of Sephira. It doesn't translate well. But let's call it the 10 divine creative forces. These 10 forces are called 10 Sephirot. And it's going to say you have inside of you, it brings in chapter 3, not 10 Sephirot, but like diminutive of that, called you have 10 powers, 10 kochot, 10 soul powers. Now, everything in creation has the 10 Sephirot. That's the molecular chart, the spiritual molecular chart of everything. But, so, a squirrel, every animal comes from a certain, combination of these Sephirot. But in the human being, which we know is called the divine image, the human being, when we say is creating the divine image, we read it even more so. We mean it in the sense of, we are a microcosm of the creative, godly energy of the macrocosm. I'm going to open up the book just to see. So that's one thing that's very important to know, that our makeup of the soul gets its structure from the way God creates and is sort of involved in the world's energy. That's one, I think it's a very important thing to realize. And it goes on in Tanya, and it says these 10 sefirot are actually subdivided further, or in the sefirot, into two categories. 3, and you'll notice you have here the 3, and then 7. The 3 are, this is really fun, by the way. The 3 are the 3 mothers, they're called, and the 7 are called the 7 doubles. The 3 are the intellectual creative forces, and the 7 are the emotional creative forces. The reason they're called mothers, the 3 intellect, is because in Tanya, it's bringing out this very important principle that your emotional state comes from your intellectual or cognitive perception of reality or of things. So if you understand something, it'll generate a certain emotion. And the 3, we'll talk about what the 3 parts are. You'll notice that the 3 are Chachma Bina Das. If you take the first letters, I'm gonna actually just clear everything. I'm gonna show you a cool little trick for those that don't know. If you read Chabad is just an acronym of the 3 intellectual Kabbalistic modes of perception and understanding. And the reason Chabad, the movement, the Alter Rebbe, his dynasty, his school was called the Chabad school of Hasidic Kabbalistic ideology, is because it very much was this, it drove home this point that you can't just make Judaism, and even we're talking Hasidic Judaism, an emotional experience where there's a lot of just passion, because it always comes back down. It goes back up to ultimately coming from your perception, your understanding of something that's generating the emotions. And he very much said everybody has the requirement to not just have sort of like a surface knowledge of spirituality and God and of the soul. It has to be systematic. And Tanya was his first written work where he systematized it. He had many other works afterwards, but that was his line of thinking. You have to use your mind to really understand deeper ideas, even if you're not a great scholar, because that will give you a deeper, richer emotional life as well, and just general spiritual life. And so that's the 3 are called the mothers, because they are the mothers. They are the ones who give birth to the children. Intellect gives birth to emotions. The emotions are called the 7 doubles, because they, I should make my screen a little bigger. They're doubles. They can go either way. Each emotion, which we'll talk about later, what they are, because it doesn't really get into the deep, what each emotion are. It doesn't go through all 7. It just talks about the first 2. But realize every emotion can be utilized for selfishness or bad, or for selflessness and good. Love is not necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just a force. And so on with the other ones. That's why they're called, in Kabbalistic terms, these spirit, the 10 doubles. Okay. And the 3 intellectual modes, they are they're the ones that God's like intellect, planning, creation. And then the 7 were the way that God actually created the world, which is incidentally why the number 7 is so pervasive in the Torah. 7 days of creation is because it mirrors the spiritual energy that's going on. There were 7 emotions. It actually brings down that the 7 days, each day represented one emotion at its core. So if we go through the 7 days of creation, the first day was light. Let there be light. That is an act of kindness, of giving, of love. The second day of creation was Yehi Rakia. Let there be a firmament. Let there be a division actually between the upper waters and the lower waters. That's division. That's givur. That's restraint. Fear, whatever. Fear is a misnomer, but it means more, awe, holding back. And the other ones are also each day represents another, whatever the creation of the day was. Tiferes is beauty, was when the world came to being, the land emerged. Netzach was the fourth day, the sun and moon. I'm not sure how that's victory or prevalence, whatever. Hod Yesod Malchut is Shabbat. Shabbat is kingship. It's majesty in the king's presence. So anyways, that's a side point. So too, in the human being, we have, and the Tanya starts a very short, and it explains it at length. Because chapter 3 is a pretty short chapter. So the first part of chapter 3, it says, you have the 10 powers of the microcosm really comes down to two categories, which is, to subdivide it from like the 2 words, is intellect and emotions. Nice and pink there. Just before we get further, is that one way to really understand this is that the soul, and of course we said before, this is the godly soul. Of course the godly soul has deeper layers that are not even able to be categorized or divvied up. We spoke last week about the idea of the level of the soul where we're all equal, us and Moses. That's the Yechida. And the Yechida is the core essence of the soul is, I can't say it has intellect and emotions. It's like, it's just the DNA. There's no even way of like explaining what it does. Well, someone asked a question, I just saw in my chat. So just for Alan, don't worry about the external and the internal right now. Not important right now. We're talking right now the external, and I wouldn't get too hung up on the names of the emotions in the external column because it's not so relevant. It's really a class unto itself. We're going to focus more on the internal aspects tonight. So that's for that. Marta made a good point in the Sfirot. There is actually a 11th Sephira called Keter. Keter is really willpower, desire. And though that actually, Keter, sometimes in the Sephirot charts, there's charts of I don't know, it's not this type of chart, I can Google it, but Sephirot charts, they have different ways of how it starts, from the mothers, the intellect, and it goes into the emotions. Sometimes it puts on the top of the intellect, it puts this 11th Sephira Keter, which is will or emotion, because will is actually transcendent to the more conscious aspects of our psyche or the soul of intellect and emotions. So if that makes sense. Okay. I'm going to stop share for a moment just to talk a little. So you have in Hebrew, seichel, intellect, and midot, emotions. And that is the human being. If you think about what a person is really in their, the personality, what's the personality made up of? Your perceptions of life, of your life and life around you, and your feelings based on those perceptions. So, Alan, the Hebrew for an animal soul is nefesh habahamit, and the bahamit, like behema, and the godly soul is nefesh elokit. So, and I'm just going to mute everybody for a moment. You can unmute yourself if you need to. Okay, so okay, so that's where Tanya talks about. It says that's the way it goes. That the way you have perception is the way you're going to have feelings about things. And that's sort of the section 1 of chapter 3, where it just sort of gives the general idea. Any questions before we go on? Because if you walk away with that, you have a pretty good understanding of chapter 3.
Yeah, Yitzi, I have a question.
Go for
Sorry.
it. Good to hear you.
So are the 3 that make up the mothers, how come they're not called double? Are they doubles as well, or?
Oh, interesting question. They are, they're not called doubles. To be honest, I never researched in Kabbalah where the term comes from. I just, in the Tanya, the commentary, I see that it says that it's called doubles because they are, so it actually brings down tears. Oh, see, actually, you know what? If you have the practical Tanya, it adds a very interesting commentary here. It says like this: another reason why it's called doubles. So I give you the more pragmatic reason, doubles, because love could be for good or for bad. I saw that in a different commentary, but it brings down here a very interesting thing, that there's 2 ways these first of all, it seems like, by the way, from this chart, yes, they can exist in 2 different ways. But the way it actually brings down is that doubles is because emotions can exist within you and within for someone else, internally and externally. Think about it. Before God created the world, God couldn't do kindness, right?
No.
There's no one to do kindness to, right? God couldn't, he couldn't have strength. There was nothing else besides just pure, undivided oneness. So one of the reasons this doubles refers to the emotions are called doubles is because it represents the way the emotions can exist internally in God, irrespective of a world, and once there's a world, how it's more of an expression of a relationship type of emotion. So if that makes sense. That satisfy?
Yeah, I'm curious though, when you talk about the oneness, you are starting with the divide of intellect and emotions, right? So how does that fit into that idea?
It's a great question. And Kabbalah and Hasidism at length explains the whole the whole system.
Okay.
Tens of thousands of pages are written about this very question of Kabbalah really deals with this of dealing with, how there's a oneness and how do we get here? How does, a pluralistic world happen if God's one? So it explains, the whole sequence. So my answer to that is when I say there's intellect and emotions, it's not like at the highest essential level. It's somewhere pre-world, but after glimmer of desire to create the world. And that's the most I can come up with now. It's a very deep, very vast discussion and literature on that.
Yeah, thank you.
I see a few questions. Okay, what is double? So the 7 emotions are referred to in Tanya, and if you get a chance to look in the link I sent to chapter 3, you'll see it written. They're referred to in Kabbalistic literature as the 7 doubles. Why are they called doubles? Why aren't they called the 7 amigos? Why doubles? So, and the reason is that's why, because it represents this point I was just saying. So, Deb G, Devora, you had a very, very good question, which is, how does another concept of nefesh, ruach, and neshama, which I mentioned last week, although it didn't say it explicitly in Tanya, it's sort of like, it just quickly goes, it just mentions it, but it does reference this idea that when I say you have a soul, a godly soul, and by extension, an animal soul, that's like simplifying the soul to one force of energy. Really, you have 5 souls. You have 5 layers of soul in the godly soul. The lowest is the nefesh, the one that like animates the body. The next up is the ruach. Ruach, these are all synonyms for soul in Hebrew, but they actually represent a little bit different. Ruach represents in Kabbalah the emotional consciousness of the soul. Neshama represents the intellectual part of the soul, meaning not the part of the soul, a layer of soul that is only intellect. It's not what we're referring to here, because you can have in the functional part, in the lowest level, the functional part of the godly soul, intellect and emotions. There's a layer of soul that is just characterized by being intellect. It's nothing else of that. There's no emotions there per se. I don't know if there's no emotions. It's a much more intellectual being than the more utilitarian level of the soul that animates the body. And then going up, there's 2 other levels, which I'm not going to get into. I mentioned one was Yechida, the quintessential, quint being 5, quintessential soul, essence. I hope that's clear. If you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask. So so then it says in Tanya a very interesting thing. It says that the intellect is made up of 3, but then it only talks about 2 when it quickly references. It says you have the parents, the chachma, the parents are chachma, bina, and das, or da'at, and then you have the children. So let's talk now a little lengthier about the intellect. The intellect is chachma. First stage is chachma. Chachma is the wisdom, and again in English these are they seem to be very similar things: wisdom, knowledge. But here's what it means in the Tanya. Wisdom, chachma, means the flash. It's the flash of inspiration. It's the first point of when you are realizing that there is a solution or there is a idea you have. There's a line of reasoning. Let's say you have a problem you're trying to work out. And you realize I have an idea. It's a flash of wisdom. It's a eureka. In Kabbalah, it's called chachma. It interchanges, it scrambles the letters. If you scramble the letters, it could be spelled koach ma. Chachma, koach ma, which is the power of what? Sounds like a new New York Times bestseller, new self-help book. The power of what is, you don't have it really clear, but you know something's there. So it's like, what is this? I know something's here, but it's not really well explained in your mind. The next level is called bina. Bina is when you take that flash of idea and you start thinking about it, and you start elsewhere in Hasidism, it talks about you take the idea in the length, the width, and the depth. So an idea, the length would be, how many layers, how far can you take this idea and its applicability? It says about King Solomon that he was the wisest of all men. He would have three, I think it was King Solomon, or maybe it was another sage, that he would have 3,000 parables for everything. 3,000. And one of the reasons, what that means is he would take an idea, a truism, and he could bring it down to so many levels of people, to the simplest of people. A parable is a mechanism of where you take an idea and you put on a cloak. You cloak the lesson in a story. So he would take in a parable, not necessarily they're all like Aesop's fables, but he would take deep ideas and he can go down and down and cloak, one cloak, two cloaks, 3,000 cloaks to get it to the most simplest of people. Probably why he was called the wisest of all men. So that's the length. The width would be the idea, the details of the idea, and it's cross-referencing how one idea can apply the same reasoning can solve another area. Like sometimes in halacha, in Talmud, the line of reasoning that will help us understand laws of kosher, you can take some of those principles and actually use them for a area of Shabbat. One of the greatest minds of Torah scholarship was a man by the name of Rabbi Yosef Rosen. And he was also known as the Rogachev Ergoin, the genius of Rogachev, his childhood town. And he was so brilliant, he would say that the whole Torah is it's like one thing. Because he was so brilliant, he could see the core of all these ideas and see how you can use this to understand this. And it's all like so much is really one, there's a oneness in the Torah. That would be the width. Having taken an idea and seeing the width, how an idea can be applicable, can be many details that can be cross-referenced. And then there's depth, which would be depth of an idea. So that's Chachma Bina. Chachma is called the father in Kabbalah, and Bina is called the mother. We mentioned last week the idea of the spiritual idea of the father's seed by conception, fertilizing the egg, and then from that genetic code, the mother bearing the child for 9 months till you have giving birth to the child, developing the fetus fully. Developing the embryo fully. So the chachma is just like the kernel of the idea, and the bina is the mother where it's developed to being a full-fledged idea. It then talks about the third thing, which is das, dat. Just to my writing. I can actually do really neat stuff here. So, da'at is really, how many parents are there? In the parable of there's parents, there's a mother and there's a father for an idea. That makes sense. And that reflects in reality. There's 2 parents for a child. So what's the third thing doing there? So da'at, which translates here as knowledge, but what it really means is the focusing on the idea, the union between the wisdom, the chachma, and the bina. And not just having an idea and then being like a professor with a bunch of ideas, but not applying them. It's taking the idea, really sitting on it till you can find the relevance in your own life. Really, so another word for da'at would be relevance. But it's the action of union, of fixing yourself to the idea. And that comes from the etymological root in the Torah. It says that Adam yada es Chava, that Adam knew Eve. It didn't mean that he just was aware of her. It refers to the marital union, that they had a union, they had a child. And that's, that intimate union was what physically bears a child, but Kabbalistically, it reflects that the parents have to have that real fixation to each other and the idea in order to give birth to the children. And da'at is, it speaks a lot in Hasidism about having da'at, not just learning ideas, but actually like sitting on them till they become real or at the very least relevant to your life and your perception on the world. To give you an example, I heard a good example of that is when you say, you're ordering, you're buying, you and your family, you're deciding what to order out on Saturday night. So, it's going to be a kosher pizza, or is it going to be kosher Chinese? Is it going to be meat or a milk takeout? You can't have both. It's not kosher, so you got to pick one. So when your turn is asked, what do you want? She said, give me a minute to think. What do you like? Well, give me a minute. What do you mean? I'm not asking you what do I like. You have to think about it. What do you like? Like, just, do you like, you must know what you like. So what we're doing when a person does in that minute is about the pizza experience, about the Chinese food experience. You're trying to sort of do da'at. You're thinking, what do I feel like now? In my situation tonight, Saturday night, what would fit for what would I be in the mood of? Now it takes thought. You're taking an idea that already exists, but then you're making it real in a relevant way that you have actually like feelings about the idea. Okay. And then it says, it gives the example. So the godly soul, we're talking the godly soul. The godly soul, again, we're talking the godly soul's intellect and emotions. The godly soul has, perceptions or intellect about God. What is the intellect? What are the perceptions? Well, you have to feed it. You have to feed it some ideas. So it gives an example. When you think about the immanence of God's presence everywhere, how God is invested, the energy is invested in all of creation. At the same time, God is also transcendent, beyond creation at the same time. You start thinking about like how everything is God, everything is in a real way, not just in a like mantra way, because that would just be repetitive. We're trying to make real, comprehension here. Eventually, if you think about how God is everywhere, God's watching, God's with you, that will probably may have you really think about it for 10 minutes or so. Could be more, could be less. You'll probably start feeling a certain sense, whether it's a sense of calm, a sense of purpose, a sense of connectivity, a sense of love. I can't say I do this all the time. This is what I would think, maybe I've experienced this sometimes, but it would make sense for me to imagine that if you think about something, if you think about a good experience in your life, you start having good feelings, sentiments. So if you take that idea, what's going to happen? So Tanya says, well, first you're going to have some awe. You're going to have some awe of like, wow, God is like, the world is not, the world's real, but it's not like the real. The real is the engine behind, it's the energy behind. You'll have a sense of awe, or at a deeper level, a sense of like reverence, or a sense of shame, not shame like bad, but like a sense of just like total humility in the face of someone great. And then you'll have a palpable feeling in your heart of like, not fear. Fear is like just a negative thing. We're talking more awe here, respect, humility in the face of something great. And then what's going to happen? You're going to realize that this God, the godly soul is doing this, is you. You're a part of it. And it cares about you. And the source God cares about your soul. And you're a part of God, as we said earlier in chapter 2. You're going to have a feeling of love. You're going to have a feeling of wanting to connect to your parent, to the parent of you and of everything. And that will come with different types of yearning and love. The highest level talks about exploration of the soul. It says Aaron's sons in the Torah. We see the story of Nadav and Avihu. Aaron's sons, it says the opening day of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, they went into the Holy of Holies and they died. It wasn't, and if they were zapped or anything like that, it was that they had such ecstasy of love. Their souls left their body, didn't come back, according to some opinions. And the Tanya doesn't talk really, so it really just talks about the two, if you notice these two, Chesed and Gvura, which are in the internal aspect of you would be the love and fear. In the emotional aspect would be how you deal with others, would be the kindness and strength. But really, it would be, I think, love and fear is what it talks about. And it says the other bunch here, the mercy, prevail, sincerity, bonding, service, those are just manifestations of love and fear, or not fear, love and awe. And that pretty much is a summary of chapter 3. So we end off, the simplest takeaway would be that we are the soul for the working. We're talking about the soul as it relates to our conscious sense of self. Because again, the soul, in a different discussion, we could say it's beyond this, which is true. But in the sense of the way the soul interfaces with our body and our brain, it would be these 10 powers, which we said is, let me get back my little chart, little annotation. These are the 10 powers in Hebrew. And the way they're translated, they come from the 10 powers as it is in creation. Then we have the 10, the way they are in us, which is the right-hand column. But I think the one thing I like if to summarize even further is that we are intellect and we are emotions. That is the makeup of the soul. That is the mechanics of the soul as far as it relates to our conscious psyche. Any questions on anything we spoke about? I'll see the chat box. Someone had a question. So Alan, you asked a question of a nefesh of man different than the nefesh of an animal. It's really a different discussion. I don't know conclusively right now, but an animal, I would say an animal doesn't have all 10 of the soul powers at the same intensity that a human being has. That'd be the simplest way I would say. So the nefesh of an animal would, let's say, have more love or fear, or the ones, the derivatives of that. It probably even has some intellect, but not at the same level of the human intellect. So that would be, possibly you could say the animal represents only one of this, predominantly represents one of those emotive traits. Some animals are more standoffish, or some are more cold-blooded, hot-blooded. I know I'm sort of guessing here, but that's how I understand it.
Okay.
Anybody else? You can unmute yourself if you'd like. I must have done a really good job. Okay. Now that we spoke about that, I'd like to talk about the day we just passed, which was Lag BaOmer. And very briefly, for those that aren't familiar with it, is very much has what to do with the Tanya. The Lag BaOmer is the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer. Incidentally, we mentioned once that Tanya was referred to as the written Torah of Hasidic philosophy, meaning there's a lot of literature of Hasidic Kabbalistic philosophy. Tanya is affectionately called like the written Torah, like the 5 books of Moses, the Torah scroll of Hasidism, of Hasidic philosophy. Perhaps, well, one reason is a lot is in there, but you can always connect things to the Tanya, just like everything ultimately has its source in the Torah. The idea of counting the Omer is very much about the animal soul, that you're refining the animal soul, and you're getting to Shavuot when you refined all 7 of the emotions times 7 and all the subdivisions of the other 7. Each emotion you can have, love of love and, awe of love, and you have beauty of love. You can have the 7 exist in each of the 7. So 49. That's why there's 49 days of the Omer and the 50th day of Shavuot. And we're actually refining in the 49 days our parts of our animal soul till we get ready at some level to be receive the Torah. So it all connects. There's very fundamental ideas here. Yes, Carol, I see you raised your hand. You unmute yourself. You want to do that?
So I've been counting the Omer by using this book.
By Simon Jacobson?
Yeah.
Very good. It's an excellent book, and I think it's actually online. I think they even have it online
Oh, okay.
for free. They have an app, an Omer app, which they take the teachings from there and they say you can count. But would you like to anything you want to share about counting from there? That you read his meditations about each of the subjects?
Oh, we're up to, what is it, 34, day 34, or no, 33?
Yes, no, that was 33 was last night.
Okay, so it basically just goes through some exercises. So here's 33, for example. Is this backwards?
Just I can't really see. It's very small. You want to just read it out loud?
Well, it's just 33 says Had of Had, humility and humility. So it's week 5, day 5. So it goes through all the permutations of the 7.
Right.
So 7 is 49. So basically what it's doing is it's explaining a little bit of what the meaning is of this day, which is humility in humility. And then it just recommends like an exercise for the day.
Right.
And, or is there something meaningful for you? So it's really just sort of a personal adventure into, whatever's going on that day and, for you.
Hey, Carol, can I ask a real quick question? This is Howard. What do you mean by exercise? Is it like some?
Well, like for example, this one just said, it says, learn to cultivate your humility by interacting with people who are more refined than yourself, evoking in you modesty and humility that motivates you to grow. And then the exercise of the day is just be humble just for its own sake, for example.
Thank you.
I'm going to actually share with you a free version of that in the chat box of an app you can download. I believe that's similar. It's an app based on that book. And it's all there. So I put it in the chat box if you want to copy and paste it for later or go to it.
Thank
you. Oh, and an app, yeah, very good. So Lag BaOmer is the 33rd day, and it is the day of the great Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He passed away on today. And as he passed away, he called his students and said, take a pen and you're going to write down the deepest secrets of the Torah. So his disciple, Rabbi Chia, wrote down a lot of the teachings they had been given orally, but he even revealed more on his passing. And it was written down. And it says that there was great light in his house on the day of his passing, reflecting that a great transmission of Torah knowledge became accessible to the world. And that was the Kabbalah, the deeper dimension of Torah. Till then, it had been passed down, small group, orally, and he had sort of commissioned them on the day, been given permission by heaven to reveal and write down those secrets onto a manuscript, which was the Zohar. So in a sense, Lag BaOmer, not in a sense, Lag BaOmer is like Shavuot. It's the giving of the Torah, but not the Ten Commandments, like that was Shavuot in the 613, where Moses went up and got the to-dos of Judaism. But he was given, it's the day we were given the Torah, the mystical dimension of the Torah. And that's why it's a very great holiday. That's why people like bonfires, because it represents the great light that was in Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's house, mystical light. Also the idea, today in the JCC, Chabad sponsored an outdoor social distance concert and show. And the idea of Lag BaOmer being a day you go out to the field was because the great light of the mystical parts of Torah, Kabbalah, and in our generation, in our day, it's really made accessible through the works like the Tanya and Hasidism, which took Kabbalah, which was really esoteric, very code-like, and made it very relatable, like we just spoke about in chapters 1, 2, and 3. You get an idea of how Hasidism takes these ideas and says, let's go do something with it. Let's go take these spiritual ideas and make them give us great revelation of ourselves, of who we are and how great and what great things we can and are meant to do. And one of the reasons the celebrations of Lag BaOmer are outdoors is because you want to show that the great light of Torah shouldn't be in a synagogue only. Shouldn't be in just someone's study hall. It has to go transform the world. So as we learn Tanya, I thought it was very appropriate to mention that this holiday is sort of like the giving of all the deeper dimensions of Torah, of which Tanya is part of. And when we are part of this class and whatever we learn of Tanya, of Hasidism, we're really carrying on a 1,000-year-old, 1,000-plus-year-old tradition of getting access to the secrets, to the real, the kishkas of the Torah, and the why. Why is it like this? Tanya will go into the spiritual anatomy, and then we'll get into the philosophical reasonings behind our anatomy, and the philosophical and bigger picture purpose of everything, of our souls. So as we learn this, it's a wonderful thing, because we're really carrying in the ways of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, whose day is today Lag BaOmer. Carol, you had a question? You can unmute yourself. No, your hand just raised. Okay. Well, that concludes tonight's class. Next week, we're going to chapter 4. If you have the Practical Tanya, that's on page 63. And we're going to talk about the close of your soul. We spoke about the modes, the states of being of the soul, the components. Now we're going to talk about next week we'll talk about the close of the soul. Stay tuned.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Yitzi.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yitzi.
Thank you very much for joining.
Now I'm gonna be zooming.
Thank you very much.
I'm
Thank
gonna
you.
be
And you're welcome. The recording is now